attempt in this direction. This session features discussion on Indian literature in foreign languages, including the initiatives in India and in other countries. शेयर को ये मंच प्रदान करें। मैं निवेदन करती हूँ साहित्य अकादमी के सचिव डॉक्टर श्रीनिवास राव से कि मंच पर आकर हमारे सभी वक्ताओं का, हमारे पैनल का स्वागत करें। So let's begin with Linda Hess, who's chairing the session. Ms. Linda Hess, Shri Abhay Maurya. Mr. Danielle Niger is from France. Mr. David Puig is from Dominican Republic. Shri S.P. Ganguly. Shri Santhan Ayathurai from Sri Lanka. Ms. Selina Hussain from Bangladesh. Ms. Sophana Sri Champa from Thailand. Mr. Tulsi Devas from Nepal. Thank you, Dr. Rao. And we also would like to welcome amongst us Shri Ibrahim Wahid from Maldives, who's joined us online. So just to save time, ladies and gentlemen, I would just introduce the chair to you, and then she in turn will invite everyone to speak and introduce them. Ms. Linda Hess is a scholar, translator, whose life work has centered on the 15th century poet Kabir. She has also written about Tulsidas and the Ram Leela of Ramnagar. Currently, she is translating a collection of Kabir poetry from a 400-year-old to be published in the Murali Classical Library of India series from Harvard University Press. Linda taught in the Department of Religious Studies at Stanford University until her retirement in 2017. Over to Ms. Linda Hess.
दोस्तों, मैं दो वाक्य हिंदी में बोलूंगी, लेकिन चूंकि हमारा पैनल, अरे ये दिलचस्प बात है कि जब अमेरिकन हिंदी में बोलने या किसी भी भारतीय भाषा में बोले तो लोग अप्लॉज करते हैं, क्योंकि साधारण बात है।
प्रतिभागियों से, सभी पार्टिसिपेंट से निवेदन करती हूं कि कृपया मंच पर आएं।
ठीक है, I just wanted to say a few words in Hindi.
ऐसी ही है ये बैन।
What? What do I have to do? I don't understand, but just tell me.
Mr. Ibrahim, can you please mute yourself till the time you have to speak? Mr. Wahid from Maldives, please mute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, so first I just want to express on behalf of all of us, I believe we are 10 people from 9 different countries on this panel today. It's probably the biggest panel of all. So all of us in some way seem to be involved in the translation of Indian literatures and languages into languages spoken outside of India. However, the title Indian literature in foreign languages is a little bit questionable. Some of us translate into English, which I've heard is an Indian language. One of us translates from Tamil into English and English into Tamil, both of them Indian languages. We could raise the same question about Nepali. So right off the bat, our categories are intriguing. But most of the people here have been involved in bringing Indian literature to languages which are definitely beyond India. We can only have very short statements by all of these distinguished people, given the large number of people we have. So actually, we have been asked to speak for 8 minutes each. So let's see if we can be masters of brevity. I hope that nobody can be thorough about the work that they do. So I hope everybody will just pick something that is especially vivid for you, or something that's especially meaningful to you, or something that's memorable, something you just want to say today. And I'm actually going to time everybody so that everybody gets a chance to speak. So I've brought these manjira, which came from the Kabir singers of Madhya Pradesh. And at 7 minutes, I'm going to hit 1. Nice sound. And at 8 minutes, I'll be a little more enthusiastic. Okay? And that way, everybody will get a chance, everybody will get an equal chance to sing. I said sing. That was a little slip, but it will be wonderful if anybody does sing. I will begin by saying a few words about the work that I have done. Most everybody in the room would know who Kabir was and is still very much alive in the culture all over, particularly North India, but not only the North. And I got involved somehow. Some people say it was from a past life. Some people say it was a conjunction of planets, but it's been many, many years I got involved in reading, studying, translating, and being translated by Kabir, I would say. In this long period of time, I've had a chance to work with Kabir from many different angles. Especially, I started out like any student of literature with texts, learning how to read text. I went to Banaras Hindu University in the 1970s, and I found somebody who was willing to help me, Dr. Shubdev Singh, who had done work on Kabir. And he taught me. He was my first guru in the language of Kabir. And we worked on the Bijak of Kabir, so a written text. But somehow I always knew that the life of Kabir throughout all of the centuries since his life in the 15th century, probably his death in 1518, has been oral up until today, has been oral and musical. Kabir himself, didn't write anything. We believe, we meaning the scholarly types, believe that he may well have been illiterate, and he composed, genius that he was, he composed these fantastic songs and dohas. Songs meaning the longer ones, the bhajan that are sung today as bhajans, and dohas or sakis being the couplets that are short and pithy. And he was so powerful and so charismatic that people picked up those songs and spread them very quickly, all from east to west across the regions where Hindi and its related languages are spoken. It was later that they began to be written down. And I'll get to the writing down in a minute. Actually, who's timing me? That's the flaw in this whole thing. Yeah, somebody whistle at me when you had at about 7 minutes. Anyway, I started with written texts, but I had a longing to know the oral musical tradition, because even though everybody is even though all of you are very, very literate, if you are Hindi-speaking people, you learned Kabir, in school, you learned dohas, and you've heard the bhajans. A lot of it is alive in you through music. And I wanted to learn that. Long story short, I got a chance to do it. I spent about 12 or 13 years, mostly living with singers, particularly the folk singers, Kabir singers of Madhya Pradesh. And many of you will have heard of Prahlad Singh Tipani, who has become an iconic, famous Kabir singer, received the Padma Shri, he is my guru in Kabir in every possible way, but particularly in oral and musical Kabir. So after doing that, that was so thrilling that I felt I'm not the type who really fools around with old texts anymore. I'm the type that likes to hang around with singers. Anyway, the irony is that now various circumstances have combined that I am working on a big project to translate one of the earliest large collections of Kabir from a manuscript that was written in Rajasthan exactly 400 years ago. So there's so many ways that one could say something about the activity of translating Kabir or about the appeal of Kabir to foreign audiences. Kabir is actually very appealing to audiences in the Americas and Europe, I believe, and there are reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into. I just want to give you one example. One example of a poem. I want you to think about how these poems or songs or recited dohas have traveled over 600 years in so many forms, first entirely oral, changing everywhere they went, becoming more Rajasthani here, more Gujarati there, more Bhojpuri there, because they were in the bodies of the people who were singing them and the people who were listening. And just imagine what is the relationship of the bodies of songs that are sung now and the songs that were written down 400 or 450 years ago? It turns out that the popular ones, most popular, if I had more time, I'd ask you to name them. What is your favorite Kabir song? Somebody would say, Moko kahan dhoonde re bande mein to tere paas. Somebody would say, Jeeni Jeeni Chatariya. More than one person would say that. Somebody would say Urjaiga Hansa Khela, and so on. None of these songs that are popular now are found in this old manuscript. So I was curious, what songs have remained over 400 years, relatively intact, and are still sung today? There are a few, and I've picked out one to share with you today. People often ask me questions, all kinds of questions about Kabir, about his adhyatmik, his spirituality, whether he was a Vaishnava or a yogi or a Sufi or whatever he was. They ask about the power of his language and many different ways to talk about Kabir. Or was he Muslim, or was he a disciple of Ramananda? All of these questions. Often they ask about Kabir's prasamikta, right? His relevance for us in the world today. And I've picked this one out for that. This is a song which I was going to play a little bit off the internet, but my internet isn't working. But some of you will have heard this, particularly from the famous singer Shubha Mudgal. Has anybody heard her sing? Hamare Ram, Rahim, Kareem, Keshav, Allah Ram, Satasoy. Has anybody heard that? Ah, okay, great. Amazingly, this song, in almost exactly the same form as she sings it, and you can find it on the internet like that, exists in this 400-year-old Rajasthani manuscript. So to close, I would just like to share the text of this song with you for its relevance to us today in my country, in this country, and in many countries. I'll read part of it in Hindi and part of it in my translation. Hamare Ram, Rahim, Kareem, Keshav, Allah Ram, Satasoi, Bismalameti, Bishambara, Eke, Aur na duja koi. Inke, Kaji, Mullah, Pir, Pegambar, Pachim Allah Nivasa. Unke, Puraba Disa, Deva, Dvija Puja, Gyarasi Ganga Divaja. It goes on talking about Hindus and Turks, because Turks were what in those days they called Muslims. It ends with the signature line, Kahe Kabira, Dasa Fakira, Aap Raha Chali Bhai, Hindu Turako Ekahi Karata, Tagati Lakheda Koi. I would like to, if my timers think I have enough time, just read out my translation, which may be controversial. My translation, everybody's translations are controversial. They're never finished. When the person I work with says, okay, this is the final, I say, don't say final, you know? It's always a work in progress, so I know there may be interesting differences in how you hear this, but I'm going to read you my current translation of this. Our Ram, Rahim, our Keshav, Karim, our Allah, Ram are the same truth. Bismillah Vishvambar, one, no other. Over here they have Qazi, Mullah, Prophet, Pir, and Allah in the West. Over there they have Brahman, Puja, Ganga, Ekadashi, and God in the East. Turks and Hindus, mosques and temples. Khuda Ram is in both. Where there's no mosque and no temple, where is God? Hindus, Turks, both roads are fractured, ruptured, splintered, cracked, up, down, 10 directions, every place and space completely filled with Ram. Says Kabir, I'm Das and Fakir. Brother, sister, you better get on the road of the true self. Hindu and Turk have one creator, whose ways no one can see. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce the people on the list as they were listed on the program. First, we have Mr. Abhay Maurya from India, former professor of Russian literature at Delhi University, professor emeritus of at the Russian State Specialized Academy of Arts in Moscow, author of 15 books. I don't know, maybe you've written another one since this was written down, and more than 50 papers. Affiliated with many organizations such as International Association of Teachers of Russian Language and Literature, Folklore Fellows, Finnish Academy of Science and Letters, Vice President of International Federation of World Languages and Literatures, and many honors, just like everyone on this stage has many honors, including Haryana Gaurav Samman, Safdar Hashmi Samman, A.S. Pushkin Medal, Abhay.
Madam Chairperson and dear co-panelists and worthy audience. Time at my disposal is very small. I had a longish paper, so I'll not read the paper. I'll make my observations in a rambling way, of course. The topic is Indian literature in my context in Russian literature or in Russia. But I would start that to begin with, so far as India and the journey of Indian literature to Russian literature is concerned, it was not literature per se, literature proper. It was a migration of Indian motifs to Russian literature. And I would like to mention here that when that kind of phenomenon takes place, in comparative literature, it is called borrowing or, borrowing. But borrowing, if you permit me to say, is not a simple phenomenon. More people tend to think that borrowing means a weaker literature borrows from a stronger literature. In comparative literature, that is not so, in my opinion. For borrowing to take place, two aspects are there, two sides are there. For borrowing to take place, the lender has to lend something. Yes, it has to have something to lend. And borrower should be in a position to borrow. So borrower should be competent enough, capable enough to borrow. It should reach certain standards. a certain standard, then only it can borrow. In literature, I'm not talking in terms of money borrowing. So to begin with, India had a lot to lend, let us say, to Russia. And Russian literature was an active literature, particularly in end of 18th century and particularly 19th century. It was a seeker. It was seeking motives, plots, topics, themes from various other literature. And India had a lot of motives to give. First, India, in Russian perception, in the earlier times, India was thought to be a very rich country, mystical countries, full of magical things, and it was an enchanting country. So they tried, many travelers tried to come to India to look for all these things, to seek all these things. Many perished on the way. One or two reached India, and first one to reach India was Sophana Sri Champa, who came in the 15th century, and he wrote, after that, he wrote a book called Journey Beyond Three Seas. We have a film in India, the title Pardeshi, where there's a song Fir Milenge Yaar Das Vidaniya. It is based on that work. So this kind of not a very normal way of borrowing was pursued by Russian seekers, but then there were other motives. I'll say motive because motive is in comparative literature is the simplest narrative unit, and motive can be borrowed, but plot cannot be. Plot is a combination of several motives, which is more complex, and it cannot be borrowed. So motives were being borrowed by Russian literature, and several motives, particularly about Buddha and various other Indian phenomena, were traveled to Russian literature. But Indian literature per se started reaching Russian literature toward the end of 18th century. The first work which was translated into Russian was in 1788, and it was Bhagavad-Gita, which was first translated into German, and from German into English, and from English into Russian. It was done by a famous Russian poet called Karamzin. And Karamzin translated it, and I would like to quote his words, why he translated. He says, "The creative spirit does not lie in Europe alone. It is a citizen of the universe. The creative spirit is the citizen of the universe. Man is everywhere a man. Everywhere he has a sensitive heart, and in the mirror of his imagination, he holds both heaven and earth." And then he says, Karamzin in Kalidasa's drama, that is Kuntala, he says, he finds the greatest beauty of poetry, gentle feelings, ineffable tenderness, the purest, inimitable nature, and great art. Karamzin compared Kalidasa to Homer, and in fact said it is as great as Homer. So that was the first work that went to Russian literature in translation. The second work was, which was translated into Russian, was Nala Damayanti by a famous Russian poet called Zhukovsky. He was a founder of Russian Romanticism. And after translating the book, the work, he wrote a poem on India and India's enchanting beauty, India's beautiful dawn, India's beautiful sunsets, and beauty of a wedding, beauty of a bride, etc., etc. And these works further generated certain motives on the basis of which Russian literary figures created several works. I will simply name a few. Oh, sorry. Just I wanted to tell that finally, many Russian writers wrote poems, stories based on the Indian motifs taken from Indian literature. And then we came finally to Tolstoy. Tolstoy translated a whole body of Indian small stories, fables, etc., and giving Russian names to Indian characters, Panchatantra stories. And thereon, I wanted to speak about the Soviet period also, but there is no time. And the only thing I could say is that the Soviet period, the writers came to India. They were impressed by India's progress, but at the same time, they were dismayed by the contradictions they saw in India. Thank you.
Thank you for your for your good humor in putting up with this. The next speaker is Danielle Niger, right, from France. He is a social anthropologist who has worked for many, many years in the Telugu country. He's a professor in the Department of South Asia and Himalayan Studies at the French National Institute for Oriental Languages and Civilizations, long name, in Paris. He's quite known to be a master of the language. I Googled you. They are quite impressed with what a fabulous master of Telugu you are. One article says he is French, but when he speaks Telugu, he has a typical Andhra twang and drawl. From his earliest fieldwork, he fell in love with Telugu culture. He has translated many works from popular folk drama to classical and modern poetry and prose. In his own institute, he discovered that only about 10 professors knew about Telugu language and culture, and about 100 knew of Tamil language and culture. So he was inspired to make it his mission to translate a body of knowledge in Telugu language into French. He's also authored a Telugu French dictionary and has been honored by the Lok Nayak Foundation and the Telugu Association of Netherlands, among others. Mr. Niger.
Thank you, madam. Sabame Sablo Gonko Namaste. Andariki Namaskaram. Bonjour à tout le monde avec un grand plaisir. This is my French language. And hello everybody on the Vedika. I will not speak about my work because anyway, it has been done for me in a very, very good manner. In fact, Abi ex Sandesh hai. I think it is an address that is beyond this audience. And really, I wish to be able to make an appeal to various bodies, academic and other bodies in India, about some urgent need for favoring the possibility of a better knowledge of many other languages than English in the outside world, outside of English or Russian, for instance, but and so on. And therefore, usually I don't write what I'm going to say. You will. I hope you. I do apologize for reading what I've been writing, because I found it easier to suppress my emotional aspects. The founding fathers of independent India did well in elaborating a constitutional framework that provides and guarantees full and complete unity of a unique civilization, that is India, in a large diversity of cultures, people, and languages. Just think about the variety of the multiple roots and branches that altogether gives an incomparable strength to the trunk of a national Kalpavruksha. Dr. Chamu Krishna Sastri explained this in his own way during many languages, one literature panel on the occasion of a recent celebration of Indian literatures during the very recent Paris Book Festival this last April, while Srimati Dr. Sudhamurthy made an interesting and very correct parallel about the cultural situation between the various numeral languages of Europe on the one hand, and the many regional languages of India that in this land bring a flourishing constitutional unity to this unique country. This is directly and fundamentally related to the subject of Indian literature in foreign languages at hand. My brief prasanga here, Krypton, is related to the topic of mother tongues in India as well, more particularly to the question of their cultural survival in the face of English fascination, supremacy, and domination in today's world. It does relate to the necessity, in my mind, in my view, of translation of various Indian idioms in multiple languages outside in the world to bring a consciousness about their existence as well as richness of purport, to have these specific literatures of India being known in the outside world, which means that not only the literatures, but also the languages have to be known, which often they are not, and propagated outside their own circumscribed, too often limited sphere of influence. This short allocution also deals with the imperative necessity of educating qualified bilingual translators issuing from mother tongues from outside the span or from outside the only span of the sole English language, both in the source and in the target languages. Without translators, no translation. For instance, just think what is the fate of literary translations from Oriya, Kannada, or Marathi languages into, say, Spanish, French, or Swedish. And that would also be true from Telugu or for Telugu, Manipuri, Malayalam into French, for example. Notwithstanding the fact that Spanish or French have a huge sphere in the world of literary and linguistic dissemination in the whole of Latin America, Central or South America, for instance, or other large parts of the world, at times or in places where English is far from being as prevalent, if it is prevalent at all. We can also think about Portuguese, Italian in the same way. This address, then, is an appeal for consideration and reflection within circles, Indian circles, related to language, literature, and translation in the Indian land itself or herself, foremost within the Sahitya Academy, of course, foremost. Sorry for my English as well at times. You have hereby understood that I shall not articulate ideas about translation in terms of aesthetics, linguistic features, or technicity. Yet, I truly believe that translation comes in the train of the literary work it aims to transpose through Anusrujana in Telugu. In a nutshell, my view about literature is what has been already said, literature and poetry, is that it is an expression of thoughts, concepts, perceptions, and feelings emerging out from individual or collective filters of culture and society, located in style and grace. And here we have to reassert firmly the parallel overimportance of folk and oral forms of poetry and literature as well. In translation, all value lies in the force of reproduction of beauty, original strength of feelings, thoughts, and intents taken from the original work and brought out in another and different system of language and formal literary conventions and constraints. Okay, I just slip everything else. To say one word to close up. I belong, as was said, to a French National Institute of about Oriental languages and civilizations. It is unique in the world in the sense that it teaches up to 102 or 103 language from various parts. Some of the languages have no more than 10,000 locutors. And of course, we teach not only language, but as well social sciences, humanities, and so on. What is important, and I close here, what is important is that there are so many values which are embedded in every language of the world that it is a real tragedy each time that this particular language disappears. And therefore, translating them enables that language maybe to get also some support from the exterior, which will in its turn have some effect from the place where it originates. Thank you very much.
The next speaker will be David Puig. David Puig is the current ambassador of the Dominican Republic. Where is he? So hard to find you. Yeah, current ambassador of Dominican Republic to India. He's a publisher. He's founded his own publishing house, a translator, and an author. And he's translated into Spanish works by various a number of different authors in the world, including at least two great Indian authors, A.K. Ramanujan and Arun Kolatkar.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you very much for the Saiti Academy for having me here, to the co-panelists and to the public. Danielle decided not to talk very humbly, not to talk at all about himself. That's what he said. But I'm going to do exactly the contrary. I'm going to talk about myself and about Kolatkar and about our relation. As Linda mentioned, I'm a diplomat, and also I've been involved in different capacities in the literary cultural scene of my country, the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic, we speak Spanish, or Spanish-speaking country of Latin America. And what I wanted to start with was to maybe share how do I choose what I decide to translate. And I mean, the first answer will be, well, I'm a diplomat, and I travel all around the world. So every time I go to a new country, I decide to get exposed to the literature of that country. It's a way to know that country deeply. And it's true that I have translated when I was in France, a French author. Then I went to the Middle East, and I translated two authors from the Middle East, one Egyptian and one Libyan, from English. I mean, they both write in English. And then I've been in India from 2006 to 2010, and then now again. And that exposure to Indian literature allowed me to translate some of the authors. But that would be just a very general answer and very partial truth, because at the end of the day, when one decides to translate something, it's I mean, one decides to have a long relation with a text. It's a lengthy process. So one translates what really strikes one's sense, you know, what sounds right at a particular time and moment. And also, if one writes, one also translates one or a text one can learn something from, one text that has something that one feels is an interesting tool or an interesting perspective, right? And also, I feel that as a translator, one decides by choosing the authors one translates to create some kind of community around oneself, to be associated with a set of authors, no? And that will be some, we can call them friends, right? That one chooses their friends in translation. So who have been my Indian friends in this journey? Well, unfortunately, they've been all English speakers, because I am learning Hindi, but still cannot pretend to translate any other Indian language. They've been modern or contemporary authors, so I've not translated anything very old. And as Linda mentioned in the introduction, well, A.K. Ramanujan, Arun Kolatkar, and more recently I've translated an author from Bombay called Altaf Tiruwala. That translation is not yet out. So coming to Arun Kolatkar, which is the last translation from an Indian author I published, I started translating the book in 2010, so just after I left India, after my first stay here. And in the whole process, I mean, it lasted 10 years because the book was published in 2020. Of course, I learned a lot about Kolatkar. I read all of his work that's available in English. And I also became friends with many of his friends. I mean, people like Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, Ashok Shahan, Arun Kopkar, who are still alive. When Kolatkar, he passed away in 2004, and at that time he had published very little. I mean, just one book, two books in English. And Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, who was one of his close friends, said that he was the best kept literary secret of India. Since then, his work has found readers abroad, because there's been an edition of his collected poems in India, in English, made by Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. There's been a wonderful edition of Kalagoda poems in French, published by Gallimard, which is a very prestigious publishing house. So that gave the work a very good exposure. There's a recent edition of Jejuri in French. And then my translation of Arun Kolatkar Kalagoda poems came out in 2020 in Spain, in a publishing house in Barcelona. Arun Kolatkar was quite a character. I mean, he gave very little interviews. He spoke very little publicly. And he actually said that my specialty is not having an opinion. Really, he didn't like to do what we're doing today in this festival. So it's in his poems basically that you can find his thought. I mean, and there is one poem that he didn't publish while alive, which is very interesting because it's called "Making Love to a Poem." And in that poem, he really shares what his vision of translation is, and what his vision of the circulation of literature is. Translation was essential for Kolatkar, because in translation he read a lot of foreign literature from around the world, but he also himself translated Bhakti poetry from Marathi to English. And what he says very briefly in this poem is he said, translating a poem is like making love, having an affair, making love to a poem with the body of another language. So in substance, what he says is that you have to have a cardinal knowledge of the poem and of the poet you are translating to be able to render his work in another language. And then in the same poem, he talks about the time it takes for a literature to come from one language to the other, from one geography to the other. And he says, I may receive, read some of Mandelstam's poems in translation 40 years after he died, or 60 years after he wrote them. It may take 300 years for a Tukaram or a Villon or a Kabir to be part of my consciousness, 1,300 years for Tufu to find a good translator, a publisher, before he registers on my mind. So what Kolatkar says is that Sometimes it takes ages for a book to reach from one place to the other. Sometimes the process is very fast. And it depends on many factors. But I think that one of the essential factors is really coincidence. You know, the fact that at one moment of time, one gets to, for different reasons, encounter one book. And in my case, it happened in around 2009-8. I discovered Kalagoda poem and started this very, very long journey. I had a lot of things to say, but maybe I'll close by talking about the challenges of publishing contemporary literature in the Spanish-speaking world. The Spanish-speaking world is a very fragmented world, but I would say that there are 3-4 countries that have the very big or the biggest publishing industries: Spain, Mexico, Colombia. The majority of the translations of Indian literature in the Spanish-speaking world are published in Spain. And there is a bias, a very strong bias for English that come from works that come from the English because of the poor knowledge of other Indian languages from the translators in Spain. There is a bias too of works that have been recognized already in other countries. And there is a bias for a novel, for the genre of the novel, which is the easiest genre to sell. Fortunately, I would say, and that's my last words, there are still, and there are good publishers, small publishers, independent publishers in Spain and in other parts of Latin America that take the risk to engage with writing that is, let's say, not spectacular, with writing that deals with language, of writing that is more experimental or meditative in its form. And there's been a few good anthologies published in the Spanish-speaking world of Indian poetry. There's been a few works by Indian poets. And there's also magazines that occasionally publish separate and independent pieces from interesting Indian authors. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is speaking to us online from Maldives. So I suppose that the technical wizards will make that happen. Mr. Ibrahim Wahid is an academician, poet, writer, musician, television personality. He has served as Director General of the Ministry of Information, among other high offices. Honors include a SARC Literary Award, Sahitya Academy's Premchand Fellowship, and the Maldives National Award for Distinguished Service to the, I will say this wrong, Dhivehi language and culture. So, Mr. Wahid, please speak to us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from the Maldives. I hope you can hear me clearly. And I've set my camera on, and I'm sure you can see me as well. First of all, before I say anything about today's subject, let me actually thank the Sahitya Academy, the involved and concerned state bodies of Himachal Pradesh, the central government of India, especially the Ministry of Culture. Allow me also to thank Sahitya Academy President, Dr. Chandrasekhar Kambar, the General Counsel, and my very friend and the very able General Secretary of the Academy, Dr. K. Srinivasa Rao. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen, for not being physically present there. Entirely my loss. My physician prevented me from flying at the last possible moment. But I'm clear now, but then it's too late to be there physically. Not being able to meet eminent scholars like you, ladies and gentlemen, and especially even some dear old friends who are there. I will just mention Dr. Selina Hussain by name. We've met before. My congratulations to the organizers on this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. And indeed, for folks in our part of the world, Azadi, freedom as we know it, still remains a relatively new concept, hopefully not taken for granted, and definitely as sweet as Amrit itself. And yet, this is not just an Utsav, but a Maha Utsav. Kya baat hai? And for being included, I'm indeed grateful. Today's subject, I was told, was Indian literature in foreign lands, As far as my country, the Maldives is concerned, the language, madam, that you just said you would pronounce wrong, you did pronounce it correctly. It is indeed Divehi. And that is the national language, a very living language of this very small country of mine, Maldives. It's a direct daughter of Sanskrit, along with Sinhala, one of the most beautiful languages of my very, very beloved Sri Lanka. These two languages are called the Indic Insular Sanskrit. These two languages live just south of the great Dravidian languages of South India. Some call it an anomaly. I don't. I hazard to say that anytime a Maldivian speaks his or her native tongue, Sanskrit lives. And what greater literature than that, given that Sanskrit was born of the greater Indian subcontinent. That there is Indian literature is what is today technically a foreign language, the Maldives. The fact that Divehi is a living descendant of Sanskrit, sure enough, is proof enough that Indian literature lives not only in India. My wider focus today is perhaps to convey to you just how Indian literature exists in the Maldives. I might mention, perhaps en passant, that not only just the written literature, but the greater and wider meaning of literature in its corpus in the Maldives owes much to India, not in the least as an example in our own fledgling movie industry. Not just plot lines, but the music, the dance, even the very techniques, even audience expectations mirror Bollywood, which we are and have been for a long time, even from the times of the good old Raj Kapoor. We are all great fans. Now, the Honorable President of the Sahitya Academy would understand when I say that movies are also literature. A more focused, perhaps, approach, perhaps to put things in perspective, is Maldivian poetry itself. We had for over more than 2,000 years of written history, many poetic forms. The Ka, the Bandi, the Ravaro, etc. But the form that is in vogue today and has been for many, many years is a form called the Ling. Now, the very living tradition, the very living singing tradition of the Maldives also relies on this poetic form called the Ling. Now, that word Ling will not mean anything to anyone in India right now. But if I tell you what a Ling is, it will immediately start making sense, because a Ling is composed of stanzas called baits. Each bait has a sadr and an ajiz. A beautiful Ling with all its baits should conform to the very ideas of something called the kafiya, the radif. Now it starts making sense to an Indian. Poets will often include in one of their baits their own personal names, sometimes nom de plume, and they call it the takhallus. We even have things called baitbazi. Any Urdu poet would understand that. Clearly, this is Indian literature in action. That is what a Ling is, a collection of baits. In fact, the Maldivian word for poetry is lemberika, the art and the craft of poetry. There were times when eminent scholars of Maldives went to North India for their education. One notable institution is the University of Aligarh. And the Ling was perfected more even there. There is something that concerns me, ladies and gentlemen, as I speak. And I am going to cut myself short, but then let me say this. I am so grateful today that we have an international panel of scholars sitting in front of us. People who are not only from India or even from the Indian diaspora. We have people whose mother tongues are Spanish, whose mother tongue is French, whose mother tongue is English. And here is something that concerns me and concerns me deeply. And as I say this, I will say this up front. I'm so thankful to the people who are not from India, who are not from the Sanskrit Hindi genre, that look, you who are there, you have glorified our languages. You have told us that we are also worthy of global attention when it comes to literature and its depth. But then, what do? We go on a lecture platform and we say, was it not Shakespeare who said this? Was it not Keats who said this? Have we not thrown away the yokes of colonialism yet when we do that? Was it not Lincoln who said this? Why do we hesitate to say or even mention Amir Khusro?
Mr. Ibrahim, it's time now.
Sure, thank you. Why not Adi Shankaracharya? Perhaps Sahitya Academy would join me in conducting further studies on this. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure and an honor to be present with you on the same platform. And I hope that we keep our dialogue going and that we integrate our sensibilities even further. Once again, thank you so much. And I wish you peace from the Maldives. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. The next speaker, is it on? Yeah. The next speaker is Mr. S.P. Ganguly from India, former professor and chair of the Center of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Latin American Studies at JNU. 26 books to his credit. He has founded 3 Hispanic journals in India. His pioneering work has been in reception studies. For instance, the reception of Tagore in Spanish, in the Spanish-speaking world, and of great Spanish works such as Don Quixote and Cesar Vallejo in India. He's received many high honors from many countries, including Mexico, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Argentina, and Spain. Mr. Ganguly, please speak to us.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm thankful for once again, my gratitude for inviting me on this very, very great occasion that we are celebrating literature. Now, I'm going to speak about the Hispanic world. That's my specialization, which means, Spain and all the Latin American countries and the Caribbean countries which speak Spanish. That has been my area. Obviously, we have been told to express here the most memorable thing because we have very little time. So I'm not going to talk about my translation works at all. I have done a lot of translations of Indian poetry published in Spain. Last one was Sunil Gangopadhyay, published in Spain. But that apart, I'm going to talk about the most outstanding thing that has happened between India and the Latin American world till today, which has not been surpassed. There are many, many books that are being taken up individually in a sparse manner because of its publicity in the English-speaking world, because most of these writers are Indian writers writing in English who have who
acquire a great market, and that those are being published. But I'm not going to talk about those works. Also, I'm only going to talk about the 20th century, an outstanding thing that has happened between India and the Hispanic world. Earlier, the history of Panchatantra, going through the Pahlavi Persian route to European soils and to Spain. Finally, that was a great occasion for Indian literature to be available to the Spanish world and to the Hispanic world. No, I'm not going to talk about that. Principally, the most important thing that has happened is, after the whole prevalence of modernity in the Western sense, the Western modernity based on commerce and greed and colonization, this was challenged by a person. This was actually not challenged in a very open manner, but because of his work, and that was Tagore. He gave the entire world a discourse of counter-modernity, where spiritualism was a very important factor. But spiritualism related to human beings, to humanity, in the most effective manner through working of elements within this concept of humanity, the I and the other, the universalism, all these concepts, how he developed. Now, Tagore became, in the 20th century, the great symbol of counter-modernity. And this counter-modernity comes into Latin America. But before that, how does it come? In the Spanish world, it is, when he receives the Nobel Prize, the Jimenez couple, Zenobia Camprubí Jimenez, reads his poem, translates them, and gives it to her husband, Juan Ramon Jimenez. And that is the beginning of the great, unparalleled tradition, unparalleled work of translation that happened of 22 works, over a period of 8 to 9 years. So Juan Ramon Jimenez in Spain, who also received the 1956 Nobel Prize winner, he was the initiator of this, Tagore's presence in the Hispanic world. And from there, it travels to Latin America also. But let me talk about Latin America, not the Spanish part now, because political, social, and cultural personality, Jose Vasconcelos of Mexico. And this is precisely at the time when the revolution is going to begin, because of the Mexican dictators' refusal to, give open the whole democratic system to a democratic process. So this starts, and Jose Vasconcelos, he gathers a few persons and starts his movement around an institution called El Ateneo de Mexico. Now, El Ateneo de Juventud. Now, then, of course, he has to leave. He has to go to the United States. He's persecuted by the opponents. And from there, he, sees, Tagore's translation, particularly, of Sadhana, of the Crescent Moon, etc. There are 4 works which he thinks are very, very important for the Mexican. And when he comes back to Mexico after the revolution is successful, after the 1970s, so he is made the secretary or the minister of culture, and he prints more than 25,000 copies of some of his books in order to distribute to the Mexicans who are illiterate, who are rustic, who have not had the opportunity to open themselves other than the typical, deterministic capitalist philosophy that was prevailing at that time in Mexico. Mexican populace was not at all, aware of what was happening in the rest of the world. It is Jose Vasconcelos who brings through the God, and it is the beginning, and he shows how through, oh, it's already 1 minute more. Okay, now, so these 25,000 copies are distributed, and he does that in order to give to the Mexicans a new theory called the raza cosmica, cosmic race. He wanted to make the Mexicans turn it into a new race through the help of the Tagorian concept of salvation, which is a combination of sadhana, which is a combination of the salvation through our principles, through the Indian principles, and through the Buddhist principles of love. This is what he gives. After that, there are other personalities of India. M.N. Roy, for example, is there, and Mexico becomes the seat for the spread of the Tagorian literature. And that goes to other countries, to Chile and Argentina, which are till today, occupied with the work of translation and, of many of Tagorian works throughout the century. And now, even what is being tried is in many schools in Chile, in Brazil, in Mexico, the Tagorian concept of education. Now, I only wanted to point out this great point of contact between India and the Hispanic world, particularly the Latin American world. Thank you very much.
It's wonderful and amazing that everyone is consenting, because you're seeing a tiny corner of universes of knowledge that everybody has about literature. And so thanks to everyone for their cooperation. The next speaker is Salina Hossain from Bangladesh. She's a famous and extremely prolific author of 46 novels, 17 short story collections, right? 46 novels, 17 collections of short stories, 39 children's books, 17 essay collections. Ta-da! Chairperson of the Bangla Academy of Bangladesh, and her numerous awards include the Rabindra Smriti Puraskar, the Bangla Academy Award, and the Sark Literary Award. And even for such an incredible author, I will ring the bell at 6 minutes.
Thank you very much to the Ministry of Culture and Sahitya Academy to organize this International Literature Festival and invite us. All of them are here. It's a good organization. The theme is Indian literature in foreign languages. Virtually every nation and culture has a rich literary tradition, while native language readers are the first to benefit from it. Translation of works from the vernacular to other languages opens windows on the thoughts, values, history, and life experience of other societies and cultures. Translated works of literature transport readers to the broader world beyond, seeking deeper understanding, appreciation, and tolerance, and a keener sense of global experience and what it means to be human. India has a rich and varied literary tradition. It is home to more than 20 languages. The literature of these languages capture a vibrancy of culture, thoughts, and values, each contextually unique, but also capturing the commonalities of human experience, emotion, and expeditions that are shared across cultures and resonate with broader experience. India's diversity of languages has also elevated English as an important link language in everyday communication and literature, with many of India's most gifted authors writing in English and their works translated in other languages. In the last century, works by Indian authors have been translated into a number of languages. Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali was translated into English by the poet himself and figured prominently in the canon of works that earned him to the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1931, the first non-European to be so honored. Gitanjali has since been translated in more than 23 foreign languages, including all major European languages. Tagore's work introduced international readers to Bengali literature and culture, seeding a fascination with Indian literature that has led to the translation of hundreds of Indian novels, including the works of popular contemporary writers. More recently, Gitanjali Sri's novel, Tomb of Sand, was awarded the International Booker Prize, the prestigious award for fiction translated into English. It is the first Indian language novel to be so honored and the first in Hindi to secure a Booker nomination. Ms. Sri's recognition makes her an ambassador of sorts of India, transcending the boundaries of geography and culture. India has assumed a prominent role and place in sharing the gift of literature beyond its borders, with Indian authors opening the depth and nuances of their culture and world views, readers of their translated work. Thank you all.
Chamatkar. Thank you for this great act of generosity to not take the full time up. Thank you. Two more speakers. Three more speakers. Sophana. Oh, Santan, excuse me, sorry. I skipped Santan. You are next. Yeah, please forgive me. Santan Ayaturai. Yeah. He's your friend. Okay. From Sri Lanka. He writes in English and Tamil. He's the author of more than 30 books, including stories, novels, essays, travel writings, and translation. His works are published in both Sri Lanka and India. His awards include Sahitya Ratna of Sri Lanka. He's been a Premchand Fellow at India's Sahitya Academy, and we're eager to hear from you.
Greetings to all of you. First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and the Sahitya Academy of India for giving me this great honor of participating in the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and sharing my thoughts on the topic Indian literature in foreign languages. I am a foreigner, a Sri Lankan. However, my mother tongue Tamil is not foreign to India, but it's one of its national languages. Thus, my view will be from that point. We are discussing the subject of Indian literature in foreign languages at a time when Tomb of Sand by Gitanjali Sri, translated by Daisy Rockwell, won the 2022 International Booker Prize for
translated fiction a fortnight ago. It is the first book originally written in any Indian language to win this prize, and the first novel translated from Hindi to be recognized by the award. If a work of literature written in any other Indian language is translated into English, that is also one of India's national languages, and spoken around the world, it cannot be regarded as a translation into a foreign language. Instead, if a work is translated into English aiming at foreign audience, it must be considered a translation into a foreign language. With this brief prelude, I wish to proceed. Indian literature is one of the oldest in the world, if not the oldest. Anyhow, it could be easily called the richest. One of these thousands of works, out of these thousands of works, Mahabharata and Ramayana were the first known to the outside world. These two epics were translated not only into the languages of India, but almost in all the Indian languages long ago. Even though they were transmitted verbally at the beginning, the influences made by these two on South Asian life, culture, and literature are strong and still evident and need not be mentioned again here. For ages, Bhagavad-Gita, the most famous Hindu literature and a part of the epic Mahabharata, has inspired many great minds from all over the world. Tirukkural, the acclaimed and outstanding work of Tamil literature from the 1st century BC, has been translated into more than 40 languages around the world, with more than 50 versions in English. According to Wikipedia, Tirukkural, along with the Bible and Quran, is one of the most widely translated texts in the world. In Sri Lanka, another work, composed in India, plays an essential role. The female protagonist of Ilango Adigal's 2nd century Tamil epic Silapadigara, Kannagi, is revered as goddess Patini. Patini, the Tamil Kannagi, is the most revered female deity among the Singhala Buddhists in Sri Lanka. According to Professor Gananath Obesekara, the literature on traditional Sinhalese ritualistic worship contains more than 35 words on Patini. His statement reminds us of what Professor M.A. Nuhuman says about how Tamil literature, understandably from India, has influenced Sinhala literature a lot during the Middle Ages. Then there are the masterpieces of Kalidas, one of India's greatest poets and playwrights. In addition to efforts in India to translate Kalidas's work into other languages, including Tamil, it's worth noting that there were parallel endeavors in the south across Park Strait to render them into Tamil. These pioneer efforts date back to the 14th century. Prince Arasakesari of the Jaffna kingdom translated Raghuvamsa into Tamil under the name Raghuvamsam. Even after the fall of the Jaffna kingdom, the bilingual poet scholars in the north of Sri Lanka continued to translate directly from Sanskrit to Tamil, till the end of the 20th century. In the early 20th century, along with all classics, contemporary Indian writings began to attract readers in Sri Lanka, the then Ceylon. It can't be inaccurate if I say Tagore and the Bengali literature were the catalysts. Navalur So Nadarasan rendered Tagore's Gitanjali into Tamil in Sri Lanka in 1950. But as I indicated at the outset, being Tamil had its advantages here as well. From the beginning, all works translated into Tamil in India reached the Tamil readers in Sri Lanka almost immediately, which enabled them to have easy access to all Indian modern classics and to get familiar with great names like Rabindranath Tagore, Munshi Premchand, Kandekar, etc. Furthermore, the said translations were direct from the source languages rather than through an intermediary such as English. The advantage was not always there for the readers in Sinhala. Being avid lovers of literature, they started translating the words themselves, mainly through English. But the history of translating Sanskrit words into Sinhala was very long. In the 20th century, the contribution of master translator Priyadasa Nishanka is unparalleled. He worked on translating in Sinhala an impressive array of Sanskrit classics, including Sophana Sri Champa, Ratnavali, Abhijnana Shakundala, and Murichakariya. Many writings of Tagore, including Gitanjali, have been translated into Sinhala 7 times. Gora and Naukadubi translated 3 times each. Chitra and Chokabali twice each. Some of Tagore's works translated in Sinhala include The Home and the World, Fruit Gathering, My Reminiscences, Chandalika, Chaduranga, Lover's Gift, Stray Birds, Sacrifice, Sesha Kavita, My Boyhood Days, 4 chapters, Utpala, A Return of the Little Master, Manasi, Nade Puja, Malini, and Charulaja. The translator Chindalakshmi Singharachi deserves a special mention in translations from Bengali to Sinhala. Apart from Gora, she rendered novels written by Vibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay. The trend of translating Indian literature in Sinhala is continuing to this date. The need to go through an intermediary language does not necessarily exist when translating Tamil writings from India into Sinhala. Translators like Upali Leelaratna, Vimal Saminathan, and others who were well versed in Tamil and Sinhala translated directly from the Tamil originals. So I have to cut short. Finally, I must tell you one point I want to iterate. The wealth of Indian literature should not be limited to the major languages, but should be made available to the readers of almost all the languages in the world. The ideal approach to achieving this is to establish a well-organized foreign language publishing house that employs, encourages, and trains direct translators into many languages and produces close and meticulous translations. A good example would be the foreign language publishing house, Moscow, or its successor, Raduga Publishers of the past, which continue to publish classic translations of Russian and other Soviet literary masterpieces in all foreign languages, particularly those of developing countries. This, I am confident, will not be a problem for a well-established organization like Sahitya Akademi. Finally, I would like to conclude my remarks by extending my heartfelt congratulations and warmest greetings to this magnificent country and its people on this momentous occasion of the 75th anniversary of independence. Thank you.
We're doing pretty well, but we're a little bit late. I hope that people will stay. We have 2 more speakers, both very much worth listening to. First, we have Sophana Sri Champa from Thailand. She teaches in the Bharat Studies Department in Mahidol University, Thailand. She studied relationships of language and culture between Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries for some time, and then around 2007, she began to specialize in the relationships between India and Thailand. Her India-related research includes 4 books and about 30 articles. Maybe it says 50, I can't tell.
I would like to thank the Viceroy of Culture and Sahitya Academy for inviting me to join this festival. My topic may focus on Indian literatures in Thai. So as you may know that India was a great source of civilization, literature, and the arts in the East because of its lengthy history and economic connections between India and Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand. Indian Brahmin accompanied traders and new ideas blended with local beliefs. Southeast Asia was known as Indo-Khmer, Indo-Javanese, and so on, depending on the country, as indicated by epigraphical or archaeological documentation.
Through trade and Brahmin migration, Sanskrit culture extended to Southeast Asia by sea, with osmosis absorption by the elite. Because Thailand is located in Suvarnabhumi, when Khmer or Khmer and Mon were exposed to Indian culture, Thailand was also exposed to Indian culture through Khmer and Mon, and even directly from Lanka or Sri Lanka. As proof, a Sanskrit stone inscription was discovered. There are like influence of Indian literature to Thai literature, both direct and indirect ways. Content was conveyed into Thai literature in a direct manner. In an indirect fashion, the composition forms were adopted and adapted to serve Thai taste. So I would like to share with you Thai literature's influence by the Indian works can be classified according to the following genres. There are 7 genres. The first one, religious literature. There are direct Brahmin Hindu text translation and compilations into Thai from various languages, such as Pali, Sanskrit, Hindi, and English. The content comprises Buddhist history, Dharma, Jataka, Brahmin Hindu principles, such as Tripitaka, Milintapanha, Kamanit. The second one, epic literature, 2 Indian epics that have strongly influenced Southeast Asian cultures are the Ramayana and Mahabharata. In Thailand, it can be traced back to the Sukhothai Kingdom, 1238 to 1368. And the king, our king also named as Ram. The third genre is dramatic literature. Thailand was influenced by India in both the acting and theatrical processes. Classical Thai Khon and dance derived from India. Thai dance drama was also influenced by India in terms of choreography, performance, musical instruments, and philosophical drama. The English version of Natya Sastra was translated into Thai in 1923. In 1966, 7 Atya from 37 Atya were partially translated, but not have yet to be completed. The fourth genre, Purana literature. Purana is written about the origin of the world, its formation and destruction, the power and miracle of gods, and the dynasty of sun and moon, who descended from gods. Vaishnavism influenced much of Thai literature, such as Ramakian, derived from Ramayana, 3 words according to King Ruang and Ongkan Cheng Nam, or Oath of Alliance, which were inspired in terms of world construction, division of periods, and destruction. The fifth genre is stories and novels. Panchatantra is a collection of ancient Indian stories narrated in the form of prose proverbs, which were the original sources of Hitopratet, or a collection of Indian tales translated from English version by Satyen Koset or Praya Anuman Rachaton. One of the interesting Panchatantra tales is the 25 tales of Vedan. The fifth genre is contemporary translated works. Indian books by renowned Indian writers written in English and Hindi have been translated into Thai, such as Mahatma Gandhi's works and related works, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rabindranath Tagore, Vinoba Bhave, Krishnamurti, APJ Abdul Kalam, Satish Kumar, Vandana Shiva, etc. Moreover, the Constitution of India was translated into Thai in 2021. The last genre is Thai writers on India. There are many Thais who have written about various aspects of India, such as the origin of India, Hinduism and its gods and goddesses, Lord Buddha and his teachings, Sikhism, Jainism, Indian philosophy, Indian civilization and history, Indian politics, Indian culture, famous Indians such as Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. B.P. Ambedkar, Swami Vivekananda, Rabindranath Tagore, Swami Satyananda Puri, Subhash Chandra Bose, yoga and Ayurveda, Indian textiles, Indian food, tourist destinations in India, and study experiences in India. So I would like to conclude that through the 25th year of India independence and diplomatic relations between India and Thailand, knowledge on India has expanded across borders to impact Thai society in various modes via various channels, social media in particular. Indian literature has been adopted and adapted to suit Thai taste and creating novelty in the process. This shows how impactful Indian soft power has proved to be throughout history and continues to be. India's religions, social culture, and literature have become central to Southeast Asian heritage, Thailand in particular. This common shared heritage with India should remain a key part of people-to-people connectivity for strengthening our understanding, cooperation, and relationships in the coming eras. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker today is a wonderful poet from Nepal, Mr. Tulsi Diwas. He's a very eminent modern Nepali poet. He's a folklore expert with a distinguished career in many branches of literature. He has served as cultural secretary at the Nepalese embassy in the US. He's been professor at universities in Nepal and abroad, authored dozens of books in literature and folklore of various tribes in Nepal, including a work called The Intangible Cultural Heritage of Nepal for UNESCO, and a series of 16 books and several DVDs on folklore and folk life studies on various marginalized ethnic minorities in Nepal. He's published these in Nepali and English. He has also got many honors, which I won't go over, but I will just mention that we had a lovely short conversation just before coming on here about his experience of translating his own poetry into English, which sounded very interesting to me.
Distinguished speakers in the dais and audience today. I am a poet. I've done a lot of works, and being a poet myself, I'm happy to say that I have traveled in the name of poetry and folklore almost 3/4 of the whole world, and attended about 90 to 100 international and regional poetry festivals and folklore congresses. Being in different parts of the world, from Nepal, originally writing in Nepali and translated into more than 25 different major languages of the world. My experience being a poet, I'm not going to say all this history and
try to communicate what I have felt, being a poet myself, being a sometimes translator myself. When I went to attend some of the international poetry festival there in Latin America, in Granada, and Colombia, Mexico, and different parts of United States. I've been in Japan more than 20 times. So I was there as visiting professor in Tokyo University and Osaka, Kyoto universities too. So I was also in Britain as British Council visiting fellow and other parts of the Europe. My experience being a poet, right in the beginning, I want to communicate. Life to me is more unknown than known, more unthought than thought, more unplanned than planned. This is why life is worthy to live. And being one with the life, living life, you have to one way or another very sincerely communicate through different forms of literature. Particularly, I communicate through poetry. And I also experience what is done is done. You can't make it undone. What is not done is not done. You can't make it done. This is some kind of limitation, what we have with us, with every individuals in this world. But out of all these kind of limitations, I feel that the poet or the writers have to be very sincere to his feeling, to his writing. Unless you be sincere to your experience, you can't be sincere to your writing. So writing in terms of, poem, sometimes one small poem to write for me takes years. Sometimes I write even a long poem within just a span of 1 week or 2 weeks. So I don't know how long it will take. Once, when I attended all these different international poetry festival conferences, I have to translate. I had to translate. And I have to ask some of my friends to translate them in order to recite them in different international congresses. But I have come across, there is always some problem translating some poems from one language to another language. It's not just we translate from one language to another language, it's directly related to what we say culture, directly related, because communication is directly related to culture. That's what I have felt throughout my life, being a creative writer, being a poet myself. So, and when I asked my friends to get my poems translated into different languages, the languages were possible in English first. I was not that happy with this translation, and I tried myself, and I recited some of my poems there in USA. I was shocked. When I recited the poems, they were not that receptive there. And the Nepali version, when I recited my poem in Nepali, in my country, in other parts of the world where they speak Nepali, it was very receptive. So I realized at that time, translation is really the very, very difficult task. It's not just translating from one language to another language, but as the communication is directly, linguistically related to culture, difficult to really take to other culture and to make it more communicable to them. That has been my experience. And I read that poem in the United States of America. I recited same poem in Japan. It was about 50% receptive. I read that same poem in Santiniketan. I didn't need any translation at all. So I realized this is the proximity of culture, proximity of geography, proximity. I mean, sometimes you don't have to express in words. Language is not enough to communicate what you feel inside and what you really wanted to communicate to. And translating is always, I think, from one language to another language is a risk. You sometimes, you really, one way or another, either you intentionally or, you lose some kind of poetic beauty that has come up with this culture, typical culture, what we have in our parts of the world. And my poems have been even translated into Hindi by well-known poets like Dr. Ganga Prasad Bimal. He translated about 30 years back. I was also here in India as Minister Cultural Counselor in Delhi. And I came in contact with a lot of poets. They have been very good friends of mine. They were also invited in Nepal. And it seems to me that I'm having this signal from you. My goodness, I didn't know that. I thought that it's just 3 minutes. At the end, the one poem I would like to recite, and that is in Hindi from the book. Jeevan agar kapda hota, जीवन अगर कपड़ा होता, होता तो जीवन कपड़ा, होता जो जीवन कपड़ा तो उतार कर टांग देता कमरे की कील पर और थोड़ी देर निहारता स्वयं को किले अपने कमरे की कील पर. Had life been a piece of cloth, I would have taken it out and hung it on the iron nail of my wall so that I could see myself hanging for a while on the iron nail of my wall. It's a long poem. I just finish it out. Thank you very much.
It's lovely to end with a poem in both Hindi and Nepali and English. And I just want to thank everybody who has stayed till the end out there. And I especially want to thank everybody up here, all of the tremendous knowledge and experience and creativity that's contained in the bodies on this stage. To be limited in the way that we were today is rather painful, but at least we've gotten a hint of the beautiful and impressive and marvelous possibilities of the existence of the spread and the discovery of Indian literatures throughout the world. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to the Sahitya Academy, and good night.
I thank the erudite panel for their insights. It was a stimulating session, and we appreciate your enthusiasm in coming all the way from your countries. And now we have the valedictory session going on in the main hall. So please do join us for that. That will be followed by a cultural evening, and we are going to present Dastan Goi, an ancient oral storytelling art form. Thank you.